for most of the other remaining soldiers that are buried there, they're also unknown only to their relatives. Are they known? And so I had to think when I saw that, I says, wow, that's not going to be the case anymore. Beginning this year and going forward, there's only going to be the unknown soldiers that are there that we have honored as unknown soldiers. Everyone else, if someone takes the time to write a story, we'll know who they are. And it'll be an entirely new experience going to Arlington National Cemetery and then rolling out into cemeteries everywhere else.
You're listening to the Stories Behind the Stars podcast, and I'm your host, Tatiana Fallon. This podcast is run by the organization Stories Behind the Stars. We have the goal of writing a story for every American service member killed during World War II. That's over 420,000. We are accomplishing this goal through amazing volunteers who you will hear in this podcast as they research and write these stories. If you're at all interested in becoming a volunteer and researching and writing these stories, please check us out at storiesbehindthestars.org. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy this amazing content that we're finding. Welcome to the podcast. Today we have Don Milne with us. We're going to be doing an update on where Stories Behind the Stars is. We've been in operation for 2 years now. I guess come this summer, right? And so we just want to let all of our volunteers and all of our supporters know what we're working on and what to look for in the future. So, Don, can you tell us some of the things that are happening right now?
Well, thank you, Tatiana. The main thing that we're working on right now is our project for Arlington National Cemetery. And we got that started first part of January. And our goal is to get as many names completed by Memorial Day of this year. So at this point, we have about 100 people that are helping write stories, but I would like to see about 300. If you get 300 people doing a project like this, they need to do like on average one per week, and then we can get the names done that we plan to get done. With fewer people, it can still be done, but you've got to have people doing multiple stories per week. And although if some people want to do that, that's awesome. But I'm fairly comfortable with people giving up whatever show they were planning to watch on a Friday night and spend that time working on a story from one of those who didn't make it home and is now buried at Arlington. And if it turns out to be something that people like doing more than once a week, that's all the better. But I don't want to scare people off by saying, we want you to be writing 30 stories a week, because we probably have some people that are doing that. But we could use 30 people writing one story a week just as easily.
Yeah, for sure. So are these stories going on Fold 3, or are they going to be put on Together We Serve? I know in the past for our Pearl Harbor project, they were put on Together We Serve. How is that being managed?
Well, for those of your listeners that aren't familiar with the difference, we use two different platforms where we save the stories. And originally when we started in the summer of 2022, all of our stories were being saved on Fold 3, which is a sister company of Ancestry.com. And then when we started the Pearl Harbor project in the summer of 2021, we decided to partner up with Together We Served because they have a very robust platform and does something very similar to what they do with Fold 3, with the added benefit that they already have a agreement with Fold 3. So any stories that are saved on Together We Served are automatically saved on Fold 3 also. So we did that exclusively for Pearl Harbor because we wanted people to get a chance to try out this more robust platform. It is a little bit more involved, so it takes a bit longer to learn how to use it. So there's a little bit of a learning curve that you don't have with Fold 3. And we did a survey after we completed Pearl Harbor, and those people that have used Together We Serve, they seem to like it and want to keep using it. So for them, I guess it was worth the effort of learning how to do that. But I guess I'm finally getting around to answering your question. For the Arlington National Cemetery project, our volunteers can choose to use the Together We Serve platform, or they can choose to use the Fold 3 platform. It's up to them. I like to use a comparison of what the difference is. And I think using Fold 3, to use a World War II example, it's kind of like driving a Willys Jeep. You probably can visualize a World War II Jeep with just the open cab and a very simple look, and you just get in, not a lot of dials or anything on the dashboard, and anybody that could drive a car could basically drive a Jeep. So that's kind of like the Fold 3 version. If you want to do stories and save them on Fold 3, it's pretty easy to just take the story and just save it right there in the story tab on Fold 3. With Together We Serve, I compare that more to a C-47 transport, a SkyTrain. Obviously, a airplane can transport stuff a lot farther and a lot more than a Jeep can. So if you're transporting stories, you can choose to use a Jeep, or you can choose to fly the nice plane. And obviously, if you're flying a plane, you just don't get into the plane and fly it the first time you do it. There's a more complicated dashboard. So that's the case with Together We Serve. One other benefit of Together We Serve versus Fold 3 is all Fold 3 stories are locked specifically for the contributor. So if you write something and if someone else comes up with some more details 2 or 3 years from now and wants to add that to the story, they have to write another story. With Together We Serve, if someone comes up with more information later, there's a way to edit an existing story to add more content later. So we want these stories to last for decades. And so there's a benefit of having more of a Wikipedia style content. But either one works at this point. We're just happy to have all our volunteers choose whatever platform they have to add stories that will all be on Fold 3 eventually, or even right now, because anything saved to Together We Serve gets copied over to Fold 3 too.
Oh, that's great to know. So there's options, so you can start and jump right in and go with it. So if I'm a new volunteer and I'm interested in joining the project and I contact you, is there extra training that I need to go through for Arlington, or is it just the same training I could do for, like, say, to get trained on how to do a family member?
We have a number of different training material. It's all free, but they've divided it into different courses. So some of our volunteers that helped with D-Day or with Pearl Harbor, they're familiar with our STAR Corps boot camp from last year. And STAR stands for Storytellers and Research. And it's just an online course with videos and attachments and some text for people to review that gives them instructions on how to get ready to write a story. So for 2022, we've got new versions of the material. We have one that's for Together We Serve. We have another one that's for Fold 3. So if you want to write stories using Together We Serve, you would go through that version of the boot camp. And if you wanted to write Fold 3 stories, you would use that version of the boot camp. We also have a separate training for Arlington National Cemetery. That's super short, but there's some unique things you wanted to share about Arlington that are specific just to Arlington. So we share a link to everybody that participates with that. And we don't want to overwhelm people, but we think people want to be as prepared as possible to write these stories. We're pretty confident that for most of these people, that are not very well known. The story that our volunteers write is going to be the most read story about that person for decades to come. So we hope that they recognize being as well prepared as they can. So when they get down to writing the story, even though it's not something too involved, we're just writing basic obituaries, they'll feel confident that for the type of stories that we're writing, they'll have down what we need to have and what looks good for someone that's reading these stories at someone's gravesite or at someone's memorial. One last training that we make available to people is some people, they have a relative, an uncle, a cousin, maybe a grandfather or someone that served. And so they have a lot of information about that person and they want to do that story. May not be interested in doing others, but they at least want to do the story of that person that's very close to them because of the family connection. So we actually have a training course called Just One Story. And if you plan to just add one story, you can just do that boot camp and it'll show you how you can just do a single story. So because we've been doing this for a couple of years, we pretty much know what different people are looking for. And we've tried to accommodate them with the different training material that we have. And it's been a team effort. I'm kind of the last person that goes through it. So it's set up on Podia under my name. But a lot of the material that I use was created by many of our volunteers, and you'll see their names in the training material because I give them credit for the help that they provided in making this a better project than what I could have come up with on my own.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's so unique about this particular project is just to see the level of ownership that a lot of our volunteers have just stepped up and taken on and really been like, you know, a lot of people have said it's like building a tribe or a family or, you know, a really strong bond. And many expressed like a desire to meet up and see each other in person someday, which would be hard, obviously, because we're all across the country. But I think that's the interesting thing that I've seen is a lot of people, you know, take their expertise or what they're good at and they bring it to the table and share it with everyone. And it's really amazing how we can all benefit from it. And especially, I think the telling of these stories of these young men and women really benefit from that. So my next question is, do you know specifically how many stories you're trying to write before Memorial Day? I mean, what is that about? You know,
that's a really good question, and you might be a little bit surprised when you hear the answer I'm going to give that this is the answer that you're getting. But when we originally decided last year that one of the projects we wanted to do was to do all of the World War II fallen buried at Arlington, we thought all it would take would be, we'll just email Arlington National Cemetery and ask for their list of names of people who died during World War II and are buried there. So we did that and we got no response and then tried again and basically said, I'm sorry, that information is not available. And I just thought, well, they don't know who I am. I'm just some name random person that's emailing them. Maybe I have to go through better channels. So I tried going through my congressman. I tried going through a couple of senators. One of the senators got a response from Arlington basically saying, nope, we don't have that information. So I thought, well, we're going to be out of luck. So fortunately, a couple of the organizations we work with, Find a Grave and Billion Graves, have their own databases that they've created for Arlington National Cemetery. So I was getting ready to work through them. And then one of our volunteers, Scott Rail, he started pounding the pavement, met personally with some people that work there at Arlington National Cemetery. And I guess they realized that we weren't some weird fringe group that wanted to take these names for some purpose that would be bad. And so we got a list. We actually got an official list from Arlington National Cemetery. But the thing is about the list they gave us was the only information they had was they could tell us people when they died. And so they gave us a list of people who died beginning in 1941 through January of 1946, which is the time frame we were looking for. And so that ended up being like 13,000 names, and it includes people who died during those years, but they didn't serve in World War II. And they include like spouses, children, people who served in World War I, or people who served in the Spanish-American War. So right now, we don't have a total number of how many names you're going to have. We're getting closer. We started off with these 13,000 names and ended up putting out a request for volunteers to help us to go through this incomplete database and help us take out all the names that weren't World War II related, and then fill in some of the information that's on the headstone but wasn't in the Arlington National Cemetery database that we got. So they've been doing that, and because it was such a huge number of names, I took the 13,000 names and I divided them by different sections. So we ended up with 15 different groups. And we've gone through 15 of the 17 sections so far. And we're finding in many of the sections that the vast majority of names they gave us were not World War II names. The ones that we've gone through completely already, there were 5,000 original names, and of those, only 2,000 are World War II names. We're in the process of another 4,000 names. We're still going through those, excluding those that are not the World War II names. And then we still have about 4,000 we haven't even touched, because the last two sections that we are going to work on are the ones that have the highest number of names that are probably from World War II. So because I have these 24 people that are helping, we are getting through those, and I anticipate by the end of March, we should know the number. I have a contact who's pretty well versed on World War II history. He thinks that the number we're going to come up with is 7,700. So that may be the case. It may be less. Right now it's looking like it could be less, but we don't know yet, but we will know soon. And it's kind of historic in a way that for the first time in history, we'll actually know how many World War II fallen who died during the war are buried at Arlington National Cemetery. So that's something we'll know for sure before Memorial Day. And once we know the names, then part 2 is to find volunteers to write their stories.
Wow, that's a really unique, awesome story. Having known about this, the whole process, I've had a lot of time to think about, like, why doesn't the National Cemetery of the biggest country in the world not have these databases filled out? And for a while, I was kind of a little bit frustrated by it, but then it dawned on me, like, we live in this age of technology, but it's mostly run by, corporations who are pushing the data, and so if there's not like a way to make money off of the data, then it's hard to get corporations to put in the resources and the human capital to come up with and organize this data. It's a lot of work. And so it was kind of an eye-opening for me to realize, like, without an organization like Stories Behind the Stars, where people are willing to give their time, which is so precious and so worth, millions of dollars, then this wouldn't be able to be a reality, just because there just isn't those resources for people to put the time and effort into making something like this happen. And the second epiphany that I kind of had was realizing, I was talking to Rona Simmons in our last podcast, and she talked about how they started preparing to bring the men home from World War II in 43. Because logistically, it was such a nightmare to get, 7 million people, or I guess there was more than that, who fought all around the world, right? And now we got to get them back home. And so then I just, in all that chaos of getting people home, burying people, and keeping records of all that, I mean, that's just seems like utter chaos to orchestrate all that. And, and so I can have a lot more sympathy as to see why they might not have this complete list. It's because they don't necessarily have the resources of about volunteers being willing to do this. It just wouldn't happen. And I think that's also really cool to think about, because like as a volunteer, you're really honestly being part of something historic. I mean, I've been to Arlington, I think 4 times. And every time I go, I like look at all the names, and then you see, oh, Civil War, or like, oh, this guy was like, he must have fought in the Spanish American War, or like you see all these names and you always curious, like, what's their story? Like, how'd they get here? Like, who are they? And, and you can't find anything. And so to me, the most exciting part is like, being able to take my kids to Arlington and go anywhere and find a World War II grave and maybe see their picture, and see how they died and why they're there, So I think it's super inspiring to be a volunteer working on this really historic project.
There's a little bit of a parallel we can say between how our volunteers work and how America was during World War II. We had a pretty small army before World War II. And by the end of the war, we had 16 million people that were in service. And only 2% of our army were professional. The other 98% were volunteers. So we're kind of like that with Stories Behind the Stars. Is we're basically doing this because we have volunteers that are stepping forward and giving their time for an important project that if we tried to have it be done by professionals, it probably couldn't be done because they couldn't get enough manpower to get it done and have the focus to get it done. I was speaking to a historian at state level, and he told me, we could probably do that on a state level, but it would take 18 months just to get approval, to get all the requests and sign-offs and everything to get done. And then we'd have to have a budget of more than $100,000. So, and that is something that we can do just because of the love and patriotism of our volunteers and seeing a need that this should be done. And they have the time and the skills to take care of this. So why not do that? We visit cemeteries, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. We go out and take flowers, and we take wreaths and flags and just show respect for these fallen. And those are all great things to do, but it's just as much time to sit down at your computer and write a story about one of these people so that when people do go visit their graves, they'll have a permanent remembrance.
Yeah. And I also think it's just a cool thing to be giving to your grandchildren or your children who live in the digital world and the digital age, because that to them connects, has so much more, connectivity. So like for them to be looking back on an event like World War II, and, to them, it's so far in the history, but then to bring it to life by bringing it into the digital age, I think is very, very rewarding to see that you can hand that down to your grandchildren and and that's another thing that are like, a lot of people like criticize, or not a lot of people, but people have criticized us as for not creating our own database or not like doing this like, for profit or different things like that. And I think that's the genius of like having 2 databases that we're putting this information in. We're putting it into Fold 3, which is the largest, space in the genealogical world, and Together We Serve, which is got connections with the military. It's not going away, and so it's really making this front line in center and really this information really available to so many more people by not just having like some random small little website on the internet. So it's like if you take the time to do it, it's going to be remembered and people are going to be able to have access to it. So do you have plans then once the project is done to help people like just the average person? I mean, because how many people visit Arlington every year? Like, how are you going to help people see that this is available?
There's about 4 million people that visit Arlington National Cemetery every year. So it's the most visited cemetery in the United States, I'm pretty sure. And so I think what's going to happen is this is going to be the type of project that we should be able to get some good media attention. And it's just such an organic thing. We think that as years go by, it's not just going to be the World War II names that people can do research for, but people will do names of people who survived the war. They're buried there, but they're from World War II, or people that served in other phases of the military. We have to focus on something. So we're doing the 400,000 World War II fallen names, but Fold 3 will take military stories from not just the United States, but anywhere. So we think that it's just the kind of thing that we may have done it first, but we're not going to ones that have done it last. More people will be doing something like this. It was when I was getting ready to prepare for the Arlington project, I watched some documentaries about Arlington National Cemetery. And one of them, I don't remember the name of it right now. You can find it on YouTube. And it was only like 6 or 7 years old. And there's obviously going to talk about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. But there's also a part in there where the narrator is saying, for most of the other remaining soldiers that are buried there, they're also unknown only to their relatives. Are they known? And so I had to think when I saw that, I says, wow, that's not going to be the case anymore. Beginning this year and going forward, there's only going to be the unknown soldiers that are there that we have honored as unknown soldiers. Everyone else, if someone takes the time to write a story, we'll know who they are. And it'll be an entirely new experience going to Arlington National Cemetery and then rolling out into cemeteries everywhere else, that young people will expect when they go up to a gravesite that they can pull out their phone and read the story and probably see a picture of the person that was there. And they'll think, boy, that was weird back in the day when you could go to cemeteries and there wasn't some digital connection. It's just something that people are going to expect going forward. And thanks to the volunteers that are helping us out, it's going to be a reality.
Yeah, it's exciting. So you said right now we have about 100, but we would prefer to have 300. So how could people help spread the word and get us more volunteers? If I'm listening to this podcast and I'm encouraged by it, like how could I, if I'm already a volunteer, or how could I help spread the word?
I would share the podcast. That's an easy thing to do. If you're already volunteering, you've written some stories, I'd probably share some of the stories, maybe some of your favorite stories if you've written with a few of your friends and family, and show them what you've done and say, this wasn't that hard. I just basically wrote an obituary for this person. And the information is basically all on the internet that we need to find. And the training material we have shows you where to find the material. So people shouldn't expect that their first story's going to be like super perfect, but every first story that is written, we have another team of volunteers. We have volunteers all over the place that review your story to give you some tips on, you could have done this, or don't forget to do that. So that gives you a little bit of confidence. And it's not rocket science to write an obituary. Most of us at one point or other have to write one or two. Just the nature of all of us have family members that are older, and you got to write an obituary. And that's basically what we're doing here, is writing obituaries for these people.
Yeah, I like that suggestion. Share the podcast, share what you've already written, and also, if you're new to this, we've got lots of training material. We'll walk you through the process. So, what's the plan moving forward with Arlington as far as the app goes, or as far as if people were to go to Arlington this summer? Let's say we have volunteers that are close to that area and want to check it out. Is it possible for them to interact or read the stories right now?
Yes, it's not as smooth as we hope it'll be at some point in the future. Our partner, Fold 3, another sister company called Find a Grave has a smartphone app, and they've integrated Fold 3 into the app. So if you go into Arlington and you're standing next to the name and you're standing next to the grave of someone who died during World War II, you could type their name in the Find a Grave app, and then you'll see it pop up. Then you scroll down a little bit, it'll have a link to the Fold 3 page. And once you're there, you'll be able to see the story. So that's where we're at right now. It's kind of like the 1.0 version of the smartphone app. Eventually, Find a Grave is hoping to have a geocode feature. So that if you're just walking close to a grave and you have your Find a Grave app open, it'll give you suggestions like, oh, here's a name here you should look at, or here's a name here you should look at. So we're hoping that can be available pretty soon, because that is technology that Find a Grave already has. It's just not integrated yet on their app. And maybe that's something they can have come out by this summer. Our other partner, Together We Serve, also has a smartphone app. So people can use either one. Right now, because our volunteers are writing stories either on Together We Serve or Fold 3, there's a possibility that some of the stories right now are not going to be on the Together We Serve app. Because if something is saved to Fold 3, right now it doesn't automatically get transferred over to Together We Serve. It only works in the other direction. But eventually we'll probably find a way to be able to move them from Fold 3 to Together We Serve also. It's just, that's not something we have right now. There's lots of things we'd like to see, and with enough time and enough resources, we think that'll happen. What we've always wanted to be able to do, and again, this can happen with enough help, and maybe somebody listening to this podcast says, oh, I know how to do that. It's super possible to go up to a stone, scan the name off of that with your camera, and there's applications that are able to change that into letters and numbers. And then with that information, we can link that to the story. So there should become a time when you don't have to type in the person's name. You just take your phone, open up the app, hold it up to the person's name on the headstone, and bam, their story pops up. That's, I think, where we'll be eventually. Probably not by this summer, though. But there are early versions of the app that do make those stories accessible in cemeteries right now.
That is exciting to know about. So that as you're doing your research, you can start sharing that with people, that there is a way for them to access this. And if they have plans to visit anything this summer, or, as COVID restrictions lift and things get maybe hopefully a little bit back to normal, then, you can share your research with your friends and family. They can go and they can find it, wherever they're buried, if their names are done. So that's really exciting. I guess one last question I have for you is, what do you say? I mean, maybe we don't have to ask this question, but I feel like there's a lot of people out there who's saying this isn't possible. It's kind of crazy. I have seen a few things here and there, and like Facebook saying that's impossible for you to get this many names done, and it's not going to happen. What do you say to those people who are kind of like the naysayers?
Well, it's, it is an ambitious project. If you had to have enough money to pay people for the value of their time to do that, then I'd have to agree that, probably couldn't be done, because who's going to come up with that millions and millions of dollars for that to happen? But in a country of 330 million people, I think we can find 2,000 or 3,000 people that are willing to give up one evening or one afternoon a week and write a story about someone who served and died during World War II. And if we have that level of participation, that's all we need, so that by September of 2025, when it's the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, we'll have completed all these stories. That's kind of the national goal. I think it's going to happen quicker in some of our states, especially those that didn't have as many fallen. So, for example, I believe the number of World War II fallen from the state of Nevada was like 600. So if you had one person writing one story a day, in less than 2 years, one person could do the stories of everybody from Nevada. So some of the smaller states, it might just take like a dozen people doing one story a week to get them all done. Obviously, our larger states like New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, those are the larger states during the war. That's going to take a bigger effort. One of the things that I think is going to help is an extra thing we're doing for the names we're researching in Arlington is we're asking our writers to determine the home address at the time of these World War II fallen from the state they were from. And so we're going to have a list at the end of this project divided by congressional district, and we'll be able to go to every congressman and every congressman in the United States and present them with a list of these are World War II fallen from your congressional district buried at Arlington National Cemetery. But this is just a drop in the bucket. There are hundreds, thousands more people from your district, probably, at least hundreds, that deserve to be remembered. Can you help get the ball rolling at a state level so we can get this done? So I think it's the kind of project that it just naturally will attract people that want to get this taken care of. It's nothing permanent. It's just, we're kind of like building a house. We build the house and we walk away because the house is done, and the house is there for everyone. So I think that's kind of the plan after Arlington is roll out to the state level and get our states one by one to get all of the names done. We already have Utah, and I think either Arizona or Alabama, or maybe the next state. We've got some good groundwork already there. But eventually, with enough participation, I think we're going to get leadership in all 50 states and get this done.
So what do you think about like people who, why would we be focusing on spending a lot of effort and energy into doing this project when Ukraine and Russia are at war and gas prices are through the roof and inflation is everywhere. And like, it just kind of feels like COVID is hit and everything's falling apart. Like, why were you asking people to like give up their time in this crazy kind of day and age that we live?
Well, I think 1940 to 1945 were even crazier times than what we're living in right now. And I think it gives us some perspective on what conditions are like right now compared to what they were then, and what a 19, 20-year-old was willing to do back in that day because they believed in the future of their country. And I think creating these stories and making them available for others to see helps us to have a hope for the future. I think a lot of people maybe during the dark days of early 1942 were thinking, man, what's the world going to be like? Is there even going to be a world? And they just did what they had to do and put forth their effort and knew that some of them weren't going to be coming home, but they made possible the peace that we've been spoiled for the last 80 years, pretty much, that it's lasted this long. And I think that there's some value in that. And to some extent, as far as gas prices go, it doesn't cost any gas to turn your computer on. In fact, maybe this is a way you deal with finding activities that use less gas, is do something at home that you can save the money on and work on a project like this that's meaningful and gives people purpose.
I actually really like that you said that, because today I filled up my gas and we drive a van and it was not cheap, and came home and I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is how we're going to do this. And then while you were talking, I actually remembered Grandma sharing with me how they had gas rations and you couldn't even get gas unless you had a ration card that let you get gas. And how she said they were pretty lucky because her dad owned a trucking business, or he was in the shipping business. And so they got a little extra gas than what everyone else got, which allowed them to sometimes every once in a while take a trip to the country and go fishing. So, here I am like sweating to like, how am I going to plan and do things with, paying this extra money, but at least I could buy gas. Like, I think you're right. Like, it really does put things into perspective to help us really see that, life is hard and life is stressful, but people endure and people get through this. And it is refreshing to see that even though obviously all the endings were sad that we're writing about, that gives us perspective is like life is worth living and fighting for, and the people endure and things get better, So I think that's a really refreshing way to look at why this project could be super important right now. Because sometimes if you listen to the news about what's happening in Ukraine and all these other places, you really feel hopeless. Like there's nothing you can do about it, but there are things you can do to make our country strong and make your life better and have more fulfillment in it. And this is one of them. So
absolutely.
Is there anything else you want to let our listeners know?
Yeah, I just want to let the listeners know that I'm so grateful for all the many volunteers that doing so many different things that make this project a success. This Arlington project with 13,000 names is so huge that we have 8 different directors that have divided this up, and they're doing the actual assigning out names and making sure the databases are complete. I did the directing for the very first state in Utah, but after that, we've just had people step forward for helping with manage the projects. We've got people that are reviewing stories. We've got people that answer questions, doing stuff like enhancing photos, helping with databases. So if you don't feel like you're a writer, there's other ways that you can help. And we just think it's wonderful that there's so many people in America, and even beyond America. We not only have people from all 50 states, but we have people from more than a dozen other countries that they're not Americans, but they're still participating in this project, which I think that tells something about what America did for the world in the 1940s. But I would just like to thank everyone that's been volunteering so far, and I would love to have more volunteers step forward so that we can really get to those 300 volunteers we really need to do all the stories for Arlington.
Well, thank you for your time, and we'll get this posted and hopefully get more people to jump on board and start volunteering.
Thank you.